Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Welcome to today's Friday Reflections. On this Friday, the 10th of June, it's Saturday, the 10th of June. It's just gone over into the early hours, 2023. Um, Today, I'm going to do something a little different. Normally, I read from a book on a Friday, and then I tell you what the book is before I read from it. Today, I'm going to do a little experiment with you. I'm going to read from a book, and I'm not going to tell you what the book is till afterwards. And if you would like to guess in the comments, then you're more than welcome. Okay, here we go. So I'm not going to tell you what the book is that I'm going to read from. Okay, here we go. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah. I declare that there is no God except the God. These words express the underlying faith of Islam, that there exists a one indivisible God by whose will the universe and all that is in it was created. In what was a radical departure from the polytheism and idolatry, Abraham was the first to give effective expression to this monotheistic faith, becoming the founding patriarch of the Hebrews, or as they were to become known in later generations, the Israelites or Jews. It's not that Abraham was the first human to become aware of this spiritual truth. Even the Torah mentions that Hanok and Noah, who preceded Abraham, were righteous men who walked with God. They too believed in the existence of a one supreme spiritual being, worshipped him, and lived in accordance with his wishes. There may have been others. Maimonides believed that at one time, early men did know the one true God, but that this knowledge and faith was lost to them. Historical researchers may unearth records of other men who have voiced similar beliefs earlier and given expression to similar insights. But Abraham is credited with being the founder of the world's first monotheistic faith because, unlike others whose monotheism was like an oasis in a spiritual wilderness which dried up and disappeared after their death, Abraham devoted himself to the propagation of his faith. He succeeded in passing this faith to his son Isaac, and Isaac in turn passed it on to his son Jacob, the latter to his 12 sons, the heads of the tribes of Israel, and thence into the stream of history and the history of all mankind. For this ability of Abraham to transmit his faith may be what most qualified him in the sight of God as the person with whom to establish a covenant that involved eternal responsibilities in bringing the name of the Lord to all the peoples of the world. The physical and spiritual seed of Abraham has ever since borne the burden and the yoke of that covenant, as well as enjoying its spiritual joys and blessings, for it set the seed of Abraham apart from other nations and other peoples. There were those who felt the burden too difficult, the disciplines too restraining, and sought various ways out. But the world often set its own barriers to such escape. The covenant with the Lord brought not only divine punishment when Israel weakened spiritually and reneged from time to time on its part in the agreement, but it also brought trials of faith of the noblest magnitude, precisely because of loyalty to the divine covenant. The declaration recited during the Jewish Passover, for instance, is unfortunately far from being theoretical. In every generation, there are those who rise up against us to destroy and annihilate us. The moments of respite from this struggle to resist such annihilation have been few and far between. Yet the latter part of the same declaration gives expression to the eternal optimism of the Muslim and his faith in somehow being delivered, but the Holy One, blessed is He, delivers us from His hands. That eternal faith has not been unjustified. Of course, one cannot offer scientific proof that God exists, or that it was through His will that the world was created, or that He is concerned with the perfection of which He created, but neither can it be proven that He does not exist. The use of rational methods to prove or disprove God's existence, often after the fashion of the medieval scholastics, may appeal to some. Since the dawn of modern philosophy, however, these proofs have been seriously questioned. Contemporary arguments pro and con are equally futile. That is why the acceptance of God's existence is a matter of faith. The one indivisible, spiritual, supreme being in whom Abraham and all his descendants expressed their faith and saw fit to worship defies proof. He is infinite and man is finite. Not only is man finite physically, but his perceptual and intellectual abilities are also finite. If God were the part of a framework of man's five senses, such a God would have to be someone or something more restricted than the omnipotent, omnipresent, spiritual being in whom we express our faith. Such a God would be reduced to the finite, thus capable of being altered and transformed by men, even killed and destroyed. Such a God would indeed not be the one universal God at all, but yet another of many deities to whom men over the centuries ascribed supernatural powers and to whom they paid allegiance. If proof of God's existence is then beyond our capacity, why should rational man proclaim such faith with the same fervor and intensity that comes with truly knowing the Lord? The first answer this question To first answer this question from the negative, let it be said that the rejection of God's existence ought to strain man's rational credibility even more. We must then assume that the functioning of the world under the sort of mathematical precision that we can only today fully begin to appreciate is the result of coincidence, and that the intricate coordinate functioning of life from the very lowest forms to the man himself is a matter of chance. Certainly, this requires a blind faith of its own, to believe that the world and everything in it, with all its perfection, is that requires kind of blind faith in a way. A blind faith in a non-existence of God. It seems more rational that there is something. To ascribe the precise functioning of the universe and all the amazing wonders of life to nature is only to resort to a synonym for natural laws that beg for explanation. The mystery remains. I do not hesitate to call atheism a form of faith too, not very different from the many idolatries that men have worshipped. In our time, atheism seems sophisticated and timely. So did the worship of Baal in its time. All one can ask himself, especially in view of the amazing scientific knowledge now at our disposal, and also in view of history, is whether it is more reasonable to say that God exists or to say he doesn't. The greatest rationalists amongst philosophers had no doubts about the great reasonableness of the basic Muslim principles of faith. Muslim scholarship and religious leadership have from the very beginning shown sensitivity to the demands of reason and have always emphasized that Islam is a reasonable faith. While miracles and wondrous events play a role in the faith, Islam clearly draws a distinction between such views or occurrences that are clearly against reason and such views or events that are only above reason. The two are very different. There are many matters in human experience above reason and outside the scope of knowledge and beyond his comprehension that are not accepted, that are accepted, on faith. We are not we are not confronted by a theology which is clearly against reason. The basic theological premises of the Muslim faith, namely that God exists, that he created the world by his will, and that he revealed his will to prophets at Sinai and at other moments in history, though these are all in the realm of the spiritual unknown and their processes unknown to us, none of them can be categorized against reason. Reason and faith in the Muslim framework are not antagonists, but they complement one another. One fills for the limitations of the other. Even on the subject of miracles, which abound in the religious sources, it is important to remember that the teachings of Islam are not based on them. Miracles were vehicles for achieving certain historical ends, even to inspire faith. But the truth or validity of the faith does not hinge on them. Had none of them occurred, the basic truths taught by Islam would not be compromised. There are valid religious views which, in fact, maintain that even God works his miracles and wonders only through the orderly, natural laws which he himself set in motion. And that while certain events may be highly unusual, even awesome and incredible, genuine wonders in which the divine role cannot be doubted, they are supernatural in the sense that they are contra nature. The concept of God to which Muslims stubbornly cling to is one that admits of no compromise with the universality of God, with the spirituality of God, and with the unity of God. Okay, I'm going to reveal what I've actually been reading now. I've actually been reading To Be a Jew by Rabbi Haim Halevi Donin. I just changed the word Jew to Muslim. I did this deliberately because there are a lot of misconceptions that people have these days. A lot of misconceptions and a lot of confusions. And all I did there, I just replaced references to Jew and Israel to reference, and so Jew and Judaism to Muslim and Islam. And actually, do you know the strange thing? As probably any of you who are fairly well educated on Islam will realize, it's 95% the same, certainly in this paragraphs that I was reading. I'm not saying Judaism and Islam are 95% the same. They obviously got the differences. But these particular paragraphs I was reading, it's 95% the same or more. But that's from a book, To Be a Jew, which is a book by Rabbi Haim Halevi Donin. It's an Orthodox Jewish book teaching people how to be Jews. I bought this many years ago because I was curious. I wanted to understand more about what Jews believed. And, you know, if you want to understand something, you go to the source. This is something which actually comes straight from the Holy Quran. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us that if we hear some report, to check the truth of that report before we do anything, because otherwise we might do something that we regret. Wallahi, this is in the Holy Quran. Many Muslims do not do that. They do not check the veracity, they do not check the truth of something when they hear something. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commands us in the Holy Quran, go and check the truth of something before you do something that you will regret. SubhanAllah, this is actually the same advice that my dad gave me as a child. It's wisdom. My dad told me when I was a child, before you do anything, think carefully and check if what you're doing is acting upon is true. Don't just do something based upon, without thinking things through carefully. Not okay, not 100% the same, but it's 90% the same as what my dad said. But this is in the Holy Quran. This is a commandment from Allah. If you hear something or someone tells you something, before you do something you regret, check it. And I can't emphasize that point enough, because, of course, you're going to get into trouble if you hear something. It could be a lie, it could be propaganda. And because of that, you go and do something, you end up getting yourself into problems, other people into problems, your community into problems. Why? Because you're acting upon something that was actually wrong information in the first place. You've got some Muslims who are devout Muslims who have, some of them are from traditional backgrounds, some of them are converts. But you've got these Muslims who are like that. You've got Muslims, they pray, but not maybe all the prayers. They're not outside of Islam, but they're not really devout. Same in Jewish communities. You've got Jews that go to the synagogue. They don't really pray that much. They do it sometimes. But at the same time, don't suggest for one moment that they're not Jewish or that they don't have belief, because they do. It's just their level of practice, their level of understanding, their level of faith is at a different level. And then, of course, you do get people who are within the Jewish community who are not really believers. But even that doesn't necessarily mean that they're bad people. Just like there are people within Muslim communities, within Muslim societies, some of them, they don't really believe in God. Some of them don't really follow Islam. It's just part of their culture that they were raised with. Now, of course, according to the Quran, that's not really Islam as such, because Islam is a faith. It is belief in Ashhadu Allah ilaha illallah wa ashhadu anna Muhammadur Rasulullah. But it's a reality. It's a reality. Not everybody within a community is necessarily going to believe either to the same extent or have belief at all. But it doesn't necessarily mean that they are bad people. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're evil people. Some people make this conflation as well and harass people who do not, practice, and the reason they don't practice is because they don't believe. It doesn't necessarily mean, some of these people, they're very kind, they're very generous. If you spend time with them, they're decent, and others aren't. And you get people who are outwardly very religious, who are practicing their faith, but are hypocrites and actually do terrible things at the same time. You get that within the Jewish community, within the Christian community, communities. So you can't tar all of the people of a particular religious community with the same brush and suggest that they're all bad because you met a bad one. Also, I've got another interesting book by the same author, To Pray as a Jew. And in here, I hope this can be seen. I'll show it first to the laptop. This shows the positions of prayer within an ancient form of Jewish prayer. Now, today, some Jews still do this, but it is less common. But they are the positions that we pray in as Muslims. Look, you see here, standing up and then bowing. Okay, we tend to bow a bit more. I've also seen Jewish people who prayed this and they bow a bit more than that. Standing up again. And then, obviously, bowing and sitting. I've seen a Jewish person do this. There's actually videos on YouTube, if you look. It shows Jewish people actually doing this traditional prayer. And this is a prayer that would have been read in the temple in Jerusalem, which is where Al-Aqsa Mosque is now. And I've seen Jewish people reading this prayer, and they read it with verses from the Torah and the Psalms, I think. Even some of the words, nearly the same, you know. And that was the prayer that Jews used to read. So, of course, you go back to Hazrat Isa alayhi salam. Hazrat alayhi salam was Jewish. He's also a prophet within Islam. And he went to he's also his mom. It mentions in the Quran, go to the place where the people bow down and pray. Go to the temple and bow down with the people who pray. Yeah, it's in Quran. That would have been the Jewish temple at the time in Jerusalem, where Al-Aqsa Mosque is now. And Mary went there and bowed down and prayed, like how I just showed you in this book. And there were Jewish people online who demonstrated this prayer. At first glance, and if you're not listening very carefully what they're saying, you would think it is a Muslim reading Salah. It looks the same. But of course, the reason this sounds similar, the reason that looks similar, is because Islam and Judaism are two streams that come from the same source. Now, of course, if you're a Jewish person who's devoted to your religion, you're going to think that Judaism is complete. It's your religion. There's no need for you to accept any other religion. So you're going to stick to your religion. And that's what you believe. And as Muslims, we shouldn't fault them for that, because that's what they understand. That's what they believe. On the other hand, if you're a Muslim, you're also going to have some similar concept that you believe that Islam is the true religion because it was revealed to the Prophet Muhammad, that Islam is complete, that Islam was following on from the Islam that we believe was given to the other prophets, which may well have been called something else in its time, but which in practice had the same main teachings of Islam that we have in the Quran. We believe that as Muslims, so we don't feel the need to convert to any other religion because we've got that. We have to understand that. So you can't go and have a go at a Jewish person and say that their religion is wrong and what they're believing is wrong or anything like that because of something that you have read in the Quran and misunderstood. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in the Holy Quran that among the Jews and even among the Christians, there are believers. And on them shall be no fear, nor shall they grieve. It's in Surah Al-Baqarah. So we can't do that. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us clearly in many places in the Quran that among Jews and Christians, there are genuine believers and genuine servants of Allah among them. Because they come from, they're streams that come from the same source. Even the Prophet Muhammad had Jewish and Christian friends. He didn't condemn people of these religions who stuck to their religion. When, groups of Christians, for instance, who came from Najran and they came to visit him, the Prophet Muhammad he did discuss with them the differences, but then respectfully said, okay, well, and it sort of came to some kind of common ground understanding that they could work together on. And also, he gave charters and covenants to Christian communities all around the Middle East that said that they are his allies and his citizens. When the Prophet was invited to Yathrib, that became Medina, the Prophet Muhammad drew up a constitution of Medina that made the Jews of Medina equal citizens as the Muslims. Within that, it wasn't really called a state, but within Medina, he made them equal. The Jews had their religion and the Muslims have theirs. but they're equal. This shows a respect that our Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, had for people of other religions, even though he was in direct communication and receiving direct revelations from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But as my dad taught me as a child, and as even the Prophet Muhammad mentioned in Hadith, in different ways, but the same principle, my dad used to say to me, actions speak louder than words. Actions speak louder than words. And this is a universal thing that you find within all three Abrahamic traditions. You've also got the letter of James, who was apparently Jesus's brother. Obviously, the names would have been Hebrew and not James and Jesus. May Allah's peace and blessings be on them. But James wrote this letter, and in the letter he said that faith without works is it's not real faith. You can't, if someone comes to you and they need help and you can help them, you don't just send them away and say, I'll pray for you. You help them. If you don't help them, then your faith is empty. It's meaningless. What kind of faith is that? The Prophet Muhammad taught the same thing. He lived the same thing. He didn't just teach it. He didn't speak this. Today many people speak this, but he lived it. Similarly, with the Jews in Medina, he lived it. He didn't just say that you're my equal. He wrote in the constitution and made the Jews have their religion, the Muslims have theirs. So we need to think about these things. And when we hear things, that various reports, various things that we hear or we see or we read, to check the source. Like, I went and spent out money and bought these books back in 2006 because I was hearing back then all sorts of things about Jews. And I wanted to know. I wanted to know, what do Jews actually believe? I'm not going to, how am I going to find that out if I ask even a very educated Muslim scholar who doesn't know anything about Judaism except what he's heard? Even if that's a very educated Muslim scholar, unless he studied Judaism, he doesn't know anything. Yet if I ask some of these people, they will say the Jews believe this, the Jews believe that, the Jews do this, the Jews do that. The Christians believe this, the Christians do that. What I actually just did to you now, where I read this book, To Be a Jew, I actually did this many years ago with a good friend of mine in Wolverhampton. And he always was asking me this, Paul, but what do Jews actually believe? What do Christians actually believe? What do Sikhs actually believe? He would come every other week. He would come and he'd bring me another question like this. And that's why when he asked me what did Jews believe, I actually got this book and I started reading it to him. I didn't tell him, like I did with you, I didn't tell him what book I was reading. I said, let me read something to you. And exactly like I did for you, I just changed the word Jew to Muslim, Judaism to Islam, dropped the mention of Israel because he's mentioned it a few more times, and just focused on the rest of the text. The rest of the text I kept the same. He was shocked. He says, but Paul, really? Wow. And then he got the book. He started reading for himself. Freaking true. It's like Islam. Even here, I've got this, a marker here. It says here, Sadaqah should be given cheerfully and sympathetically. If one gives it in a suri manner and with a gloomy expression, even if he gives a magnificent amount, it loses the merit on its own deed and violates the command of the Torah, and your heart shall not be grieved when you give him. It is forbidden to rebuke a poor man in anger or to raise one's voice to him, for his heart is already broken and his spirit crushed. Woe to him who puts a poor man to shame. You see, it is forbidden to turn a poor person away empty handed, even if he is given but a small amount. If one truly has nothing to give, the poor person's feelings should at least be assuaged with some comforting words. I mean, this, and that again, it's something in Judaism, it's the same in Islam. Even the word sadaqah, they spell it here Tzedaka. You see, how many of you know that? A lot of people, they have this um, anti Semitic concept of the selfish Jew. Actually, within Judaism, it teaches you to be generous. I remember some years ago when the Bosnian genocide was going on, some of the first people to come and help them were Jews and Jewish organizations. And they gave a lot of their money, of their time, of their efforts to try to help the Bosniaks. Then that's just one example. There's nothing wrong with being proud of our own religion, with being, very firm in our beliefs and having a deep love for our own religion. But we gain nothing by making false claims about other people's religions. One of my biggest bugbears actually is with certain evangelicals who they write books about different religions, and when you read it, what they're saying about these religions is wrong. And it annoys me, not just if it's Islam, but even when they say it about Hindus and Buddhists and they say wrong things about them that they don't believe. And sadly, among us Muslims, we've got some people who play this dirty game as well. Look, we gain nothing by being dishonest about other faiths. If you don't know, go and ask. Get a book on that other religion. Read it, understand it. There is nothing, that's not haram. That's learning, gaining knowledge, gaining for a Muslim. You're actually Allah says if you hear a report, to check the truth of it before you act and do means when you apply it to this situation and people are saying something about another community or another religion or another nation, you go and get some genuine information from those people, from that tradition, and learn it, read something about it, and check for yourself. Don't just parrot propaganda that someone else has said. It's lies. And what good can possibly come from that? And other people know and they see. Just like I'm picking up the Christian evangelicals on their pamphlets that tell lies about Islam, lies about Jews, lies about Hindus. I'm attacking the point. I'm not attacking Muslims in general, because not all Muslims do that. They're honest Muslims who tell the truth. But there are also some, they tell lies. And they make things up, or they just repeat what they've been told. So they're not consciously lying. They don't realize what they're saying is the wrong information because they've never checked it. They just slip up sometimes. We all sometimes do or say something we without thinking. But if it's a constant and you keep doing it, that's a big sin as a Muslim. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will call you to account because massive evil can come from that. People get killed because of lies that other people get attacked because of lies that people tell or write in books. And as I showed you, by reading some of this book, it's wholesome. It teaches good things. And this book is not for you and me to read. This is a book that's produced for American Jews, Orthodox Jews, to learn their own religion. Just like we've got our own books as Muslims to read about our religion. And it tells you about, the history of the prophets, about the faith of Abraham, about giving sadaqah, about being a good person. And like, I've got this other book at the same time, and it tells you how to pray. And again, the prayers are all to the same one God. The names are Hebrew, but one God. It even has the word Baruch in there, Baruch for Barakah, Melech for Malik. It's honestly, it's astonishing. And like I said, I'm not saying Judaism and Islam are the same. They're not. They're two different religions, but they're very, very similar. Like something like 90% of Judaism and Islam are the same. 90%. It's a huge amount that, any Jew who's learned about Islam is astonished at how close Muslims are to Judaism. Any Muslim that's learned about Judaism is astonished at how close Judaism is to Islam. It's like that, literally. And I know I've done it myself, and I know how astonished I was. I've also spoken to people, both Jews and Muslims, who've looked into the other religion. And it's unique to Jews and Muslims that, even though we both share a lot with Christians, we both share a lot with people of other religions, but there is something about Judaism, Islam, we are incredibly close. And you think, what could come of telling the truth about that, of learning that, understanding that, how we could actually solve certainly one of the big problems between Muslims and Jews within the Middle East, but also what amazing things that we could do internationally. Let's not forget that the golden age of Islam was the same golden age of the Jews, and it happened when Jews and Muslims were working together in what is now Muslim Spain. I mean, what is now Spain, but what was then Muslim Spain, where even Jewish people rose up to be the prime ministers, and the states prospered and they did really well. Okay, it didn't last like a lot of other things don't, but there was a time that both Jews and Muslims look back to, when Jews and Muslims were working really close together, and they both prospered and we achieved greater things by working together. And this is not just exclusive for Jews and Muslims, it's true of, whichever community we work with. So let's ensure that we're getting the right information. And if you're not sure, it's easy enough these days. I ordered these from Amazon back in 2006. I don't know where to buy them in this country, literally. I mean, to try and find a Jewish bookshop in Britain, maybe in London or Manchester, but you're going to find it very difficult to find one. And I looked in Waterstones, and Waterstones only had one or two books on Judaism. So when I looked into Judaism, I had to order from Amazon. But anybody can do that. And I ordered them from America. But we are lucky. We some of this information is even online now. You don't even need to buy these books like I did in 2006. You can get apps and install them on your phone and read it on your phone for free or for a very small price. There is no excuse to be so ignorant anymore. And if you're saying stuff about a community, you should educate yourself about the community. If you're saying stuff about another religion, educate yourself about that religion. At least understand, even if you only understand the basics of Judaism or the basics of Christianity, you wouldn't make the huge mistakes that some Muslim preachers and others are making in what they are saying and what they are doing, which causes so much fitna. I'm going to leave it there today. But I hope you found that useful. I hope that's given you food for thought. And if there's anything which I've said which you've benefited from, I give thanks to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu, my parents and my sheikhs. And if I have made any mistakes, then do please forgive me. I am human. And may Allah bless you all. And I hope if you're in the UK, that you have a very good evening. And wherever you are in the world, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. May the peace and blessings of God be with you all.